You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew. Thank you for joining us, authors and writing fans. We have a special episode of the Write Project podcast here today. We'll be discussing with some of your favorite and most talented authors the first book that made them cry, which for some is the most influential book on them, whether they know that or not. It tends to reflect back on their writing, how they try to pull at your emotional heartstrings, what pulled on theirs. Me personally, Matthew LeDrew, the first book that made me cry will come up a few times in this interview, but it is Grover's First Day of School, which seems silly, but it is a book about Grover going to his first day at school and trying to ingratiate himself to others by giving them his favorite things, and at the end he feels like he doesn't have any real friends and he's lost this huge part of himself, which was a weird thing that struck a chord with me as a child, that still strikes a chord with me as an adult, and probably says a lot about me. But today we have an awesome mix of authors for you. We have Kelly Power, currently the president of WANL. She is also a contributing author to Chillers from the Rock, What's Written in the Ladies, and Kit Sora, the autobiography. We have Helen Escott, currently the best-selling author in Atlantic Canada with her first book, Operation Wormwood. We have Chelsea B., author of London Calling. We have John Dobbin, whose first novel comes out in early 2019, a Weird West novel by the name of The Starving. We have Amanda Labonte, author of Call of the Sea and Supernatural Causes. We have Diana Brown, author of Saltwater Joys. We have Ellen Curtis, editor of the From the Rock series and author of the Infinity series from Engine Books. We have Brad Dunn, whose first novel, After Dark Vapors, is in stores now. We have Bridget Canning, whose first novel, The Greatest Hits of Wanda Janes, was shortlisted for an NLBA award, and who is also the editor of the aforementioned What's Written in the Ladies. We have Mary Walsh, who, in addition to a long and talented career, was nominated for an NLBA award for her book Crying for the Moon this past year. We have Laurie Doody, whose children's book The Puffin Problem was also nominated for an NLBA award this year. We have famed comic author Peter Burrow. We have best-selling horror author Paul Carberry, author of the Zombies on the Rock series. We have Aaron Vance, editor-in-chief at Engine Books, as well as the editor of the From the Rock series. And last but not least, we have USA Today best-selling author Tanith Frost. The most recent book in her Immortal Soulless series came out last month, and you should check it out. Vampires in St. John's, scary stuff. But without further ado, we'll get to the meat of this and ask these wonderful people what the first book is that made them cry. First up, we have Kelly Power, president of the Writers Alliance of Newfoundland and Labrador. What's the first book that made you cry, Kelly?
The first book that made me cry was probably Anne of Green Gables.
Really? But that's a nice book.
Well, Matthew dies.
Oh, spoilers.
At the end. Oh!
Spoilers
Uh-oh.
for this 100-year-old text.
Uh-oh. That's the first book I remember crying at. It's possible that there were ones before that. I should add I'm not a big crier, so it's going to be few and far between. Like, the other one I can remember really getting a good cry on for was Marley and Me. But That was much more recent. And I'm sure I cried at
I'm trying to remember
that.
an earlier book from me, but I can't seem to think past The Time Traveler's Wife. And I know I was just like in my 20s when I read that, but that's the one I remember being like, nope, done. There's too many problems. Don't like it.
Gotta put it away.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you had to hide the book in the freezer, like on Friends, where it's like, no, can't get me in there. Okay, thanks, Kelly. Next up, we have Helen Escott, author of Operation Wormwood. What was the first book that made you cry, Helen?
Goodness, I read so many books, but I think it would have to be Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.
Really?
Yeah, you know what? I remember. I'm sure I read a lot of books before that, but it was a book I read in high school, and I think it was the introduction to real literature, not just Nancy Drew books. And I memorized the book. I memorized it. Absolutely loved that book. I just became obsessed with Shakespeare after that.
To me, I don't know. To me, Romeo and Juliet, like, it was such a... It could never make me cry because it was so ingrained in my subculture by the time I finally read it. Like, I knew the story inside and out just from outside cultural influences, like, you know, people reference Romeo and Juliet, that by the time I read it, I knew what happened, and it had less impact on me as a result.
Yeah, I guess as a female, you kind of read it from a different angle too.
Maybe.
And maybe that's what it was. But yeah, that's the first book I remember that kind of really moved me, because before that, it would have been just Nancy Drew books.
First book that made me cry was Grover's First Day of School,
Oh.
which is a Sesame Street book, and Grover goes to school, and he has his favorite lunch pack, and he has his favorite toy with him,
Yeah.
and he wants to fit in, so when another kid says, hey, let's trade lunch, I want like yours better, he does it because he wants to fit in. And when someone else says, you want to swap toys and trade toys? And he says, okay, because he wants to fit in. And at the end, he's just sitting there crying because he wanted to fit in, but now he doesn't have his favorite lunch and he doesn't have his favorite toy. And I'm like, there's something that even today I'm like destroying parts of yourself to fit in. I'm like, there's something like, you know, I'm like, that still speaks to me as an adult.
So many lessons in Sesame Street, right?
Oh, Sesame Street was awesome.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Next up, we have Chelsea B., author of London Calling. What was the first book that made you cry, Chelsea?
The first book that made me cry would have to be the first Harry Potter book, just because...
It was that bad?
It's just, why would you mistreat him? He was so nice.
How do you deal with the fan theory that the entire series is in his head and that he's still under those stairs?
I think that he needs psychiatric help, but there was also a fan, not necessarily theory, but a fan wish, I guess, that he was going to, at the end of the last book, wake up and it was all going to be a dream.
Yes, that.
I was going to be okay with that if his parents were alive. That's my trade-off.
That would be the trade-off. That would be
my
interesting.
trade-off, yeah.
I might be okay with that.
See, and that's the question I like to ask Harry Potter fans is like, would you be okay with that if his parents were alive? Because
because in my version he wakes up still underneath the stairs and his life's still horrible. But what if he woke up in a bed and it was all just a fantasy?
Yeah. What if his dad was a writer?
Yeah.
And then he was writing about those stories and like would tell him about Hogwarts before he fell asleep?
Yeah. Interesting.
I would do that. That's okay.
Yeah.
JK, if you're listening.
Yeah, JK, if you're listening, write a 9th book. This is how it ends.
An 8th book.
Yep. Oh, right. There were 8
8th book.
movies. Yeah. When did you read Harry Potter?
The second one was out when I read the first one, so fairly soon after they started. So I was like,
I read them all 2 years ago because I was like, no. Like, I only recently read them. And I'm like, oh, these aren't horrible.
Yeah.
That's interesting. The people who read them just are.
Yeah, I would agree with that,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Chelsea. Next up, we have Ellen Curtis, editor of the From the Rock series and author of the Infinity series from Engine Books. What was the first book that made you cry, Ellen?
Oh gosh, I'm a crier, so I mean, we could go back like a long way.
Yeah, I went back to Grover's First Day at School. That still tears me up.
Oh man, Harry Potter. I think there was always one moment in every book in the series that made me cry. Gosh.
When Harry wakes up after the last book and it was all a dream and he's still under the stairs.
That's not a thing.
That's my headcanon.
You're gonna back off. No, Sirius dying really got to me.
Spoilers!
I mean, it's been a long time.
I guess.
So that one really sticks out to me. Basically, anytime you might think, that's a cryable scene, I will cry at that scene.
It always is weird, though. I mean, like, there's always the cynic in me that's like, yes, it was very sad when the author stopped writing the character. Like,
But,
they didn't die because they weren't alive.
I mean, that is very cynical, and I think that belittles what an author does.
Yes. Yes, it does.
They create life.
No, we don't.
Totally do. I think you're totally wrong there.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Ellen. Next up, we have John Dobbin, author of The Starving. What was the first book that made you cry, John?
I don't think I've ever cried at a book.
Really?
Really.
Really?
Yeah.
Time Traveler's Wife?
I never read that.
Give it a try. See if
I'll
you
have to
shed
try.
a single manly tear.
Yeah, I don't think I've cried. I thought about that question before, but no, I don't.
You're dead inside. We understand.
It's true.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, John. Next up, we have Amanda Labonte, author of both the Call of the Sea series and the Supernatural Causes series. What was the first book that made you cry, Amanda?
It was Bridge to Terabithia.
Oh.
We read that in grade 5, and we were like...
Why, what's sad about that book?
Have you read Bridge
No.
Oh.
Why, what happens?
Well, we were reading it in grade 5, and I had like a lovely grade 5 teacher who thought I was really good at writing and English, and she was perfect. But she was reading this book to us, and because we were in grade 5, and she was reading to us like half the time we weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And half the time we were, passing notes to each other. So we were like half in and half out of this book. But then as she went on with it, with reading it, like, 'cause she would read, a chapter a day kind of thing. And then as we got invested in the characters and got really into it, and then tragedy strikes and the whole class is bawling.
Okay.
And, like it's gutting. It's beautiful and terrible, and yeah.
Gutting.
We were 10, and we all went home bawling and asking why bad things happen to good people.
That's
Yeah.
great.
I can't believe you don't know that book.
I think I'm somewhat familiar with the movie. I don't know why. It's just one of those things that, like, it missed me.
Oh, it was like the experience was like so intense. I can't handle the movie.
Oh,
Even
wow.
as an adult, I can't.
Interesting.
Because I can go back to that moment in 5th grade when we realized what was happening in the story, and that, like, I think it was the first time that I read a book that wasn't happily ever after, and that no one was going to fix for us.
Yeah.
Like, there wasn't.
It's almost like the Bambi's mom for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in like in an invested like book form, because prior to that everything had been about like getting us to read. So it was like, it was generally like happy stuff, or it was superficial, and this was like it was dealing with, something like it dealt with death in a very
Well, it wasn't
real
about
way.
just getting you to read. It was about getting you to have an experience.
It was, and it was it was very real, and yeah, I can't go back.
Okay.
But it's if you don't know what happens, you really ought to find out.
Okay.
Okay.
Does Thanos snap his fingers and someone just kind of die?
Huh?
Thanos? Thanos.
Thanos?
You are familiar with Thanos, right?
Thanos?
Thanos? Thanos? Do. Thanos.
Am I supposed to be?
That's the newest Avengers movie.
Oh no, I haven't watched it.
Oh, you should. It's good.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna wait.
Okay.
Because aren't they doing another one?
Yes.
Yeah,
You'll just watch them both together.
I'm gonna wait. Yeah, because I sent the rest of my family to see it,
I see.
and they told me that I would be very annoyed and to wait.
Yeah.
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 Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, thanks, Amanda. Next up, we have Diana Brown, author of Saltwater Joys. What was the first book that made you cry, Diana?
So one of the books that made me cry was called Still Alice. So it was about a mom who developed Alzheimer's, and it just showed her deterioration, and
That's
it
hard.
really struck home because
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it fiction?
it's
I wonder.
I think I read it as fiction, but I wonder if it was.
Yeah, it's fiction.
Yeah, I read it as fiction, but you just never know because it
do.
is so identifiable, and it is such a real thing in our lives.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
A very good friend of mine, his mom wrote a book about Alzheimer's that was a biography for her father who died of the disease.
Yeah.
And because she didn't have his memories were eroding.
Yeah.
So she wrote down his memories and his struggle and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's called Standing Tall.
Standing Tall.
It's a beautiful. It's by Jackie Tam.
Okay.
It's beautiful beautiful book. I cannot recommend it enough. Hard read for me because he is the author. He is also an author. His mom was the author of this book.
Yeah.
he's in the book as a young child, dealing with this. It was hard to see and know, like, this isn't fiction. You know what I mean? Like, this is a beautiful book. But that one, I've read it a few times, and it never ceases to tear me up. I imagine Still Alice would, too. There's some chords that just don't stop being plucked, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Diana. Next up, we have Brad Dunn, author of After Dark Vapors. What was the first book that made you cry, Brad?
Good question.
I oscillate. My actual first is Grover's First Day of School.
Oh, man, what was that one? It's like the kid gets the two, like, beagles. It's like Red Fern.
Nope.
Something like that. I'm going to look it up on my phone, because Where the Red Fern Grows, maybe?
Yeah, where the red fern grows, that sounds right.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's Where the Red Fern Grows, a children's novel about a boy who buys and trains 2 red-bone coonhound hunting dogs. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
I read that book when I was like 10, I think. And I think something happened. I can't remember exactly, but, like, spoiler alert.
What's it about?
One of the dogs dies. Something like that. Man, it's been so long. Like 20 years ago. But is that, like, one of the dogs, or if not both the dogs, die? One of those type of things. And I've always loved dogs.
Yeah.
So that's the earliest one I can think of that would have made
Something
me cry.
about a dog die. Any dog where a dog dies is a bit. There's a moment there.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
like kids' books back then were so much more intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like the old school Pixar kind of thing.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, and Don Bluth movies before that, like the All Dogs Go to Heaven, Land Before Time, Secret of Nim, like not afraid to go a bit dark in your children's lit.
I think too, like around that time I would have read Narnia for the first time. So obviously when Aslan when he dies, and I mean that's obviously very emotional too.
He comes back though.
True, yeah.
That's an unrealistic lesson to teach a child.
But I didn't realize it was an analogy for Jesus at the time.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Brad. Next up, we have Paul Carberry, author of the Zombies on the Rocks series. What's the first book that made you cry, Paul?
Made me cry. I don't think a book's ever made me cry because I've never read a book that tried to make you cry. Like,
that's
fair.
Fair.
No, wait, no, that's a lie. Oh. Where the Red Fern Grows, because we were forced to read it.
Someone else said that. What's that about? I've never read it.
A boy has a dog. It's a golden lab, I believe.
Okay.
And they grow super close, and they go out, and the dog dies, and he doesn't want a dog anymore.
Yeah.
That's sad enough, but then the father's like, no, here's another dog. And he doesn't want to get close to the dog, gets super close to the dog, and then that dog dies, and that is super sad. So yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Where the Red Fern Grows. I forget who wrote it, but we were forced to read it in school, and I would not have read that on my own, but it's an excellent book.
Excellent.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you, Paul. And next we have Tanith Frost, author of the Immortal Soulless series. What was the first book that made you cry, Tanith?
First one that I can remember making me cry, like sobbing, ugly cry, snot running down my face, was Where the Red Fern Grows. Because, spoiler alert, dogs die, and I've never handled that well, but I think I was in 7th grade when I read it, and that was just an especially bad time for those kind of things hitting hard, and a lot of things making me cry. So yeah, that's the first one I remember.
That book is actually that book has been the answer 3 times now, so you are definitely not alone there.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Okay, thank you, Tanith. Next up, we have Bridget Canning, author of The Greatest Hits of Wanda Janes. What was the first book that made you cry, Bridget?
My mother used to read to us, and my sister and I shared a room when we were children, and my mother's a librarian, and she, we were always going to the library, we were always getting books, and she used to read to us regularly, and she read Anne of Green Gables to us. Like, she used to sit down and read, like, a chapter a night, and we just loved it. We were completely absorbed. And then she got to the part where Matthew dies, and I remember she read that chapter, and we were like, Matthew's dead! And, oh my God! And we're just lying there, and she's doing this so we could fall asleep, So she kind of read the chapter, and both of us started weeping, and she was like, well, good night! And left us there crying ourselves to sleep. So that one I remember, being very, very upset, just, sobbing into my pillow kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that one.
That makes sense. That one's actually come up on this show before as a answer to a question. I don't think that one, but yeah. Wow, big book. I read it actually for the first time just last year. Amanda Labonte,
wow.
We did a book swap for an event. Wanel was doing the book swap thing, so a bunch of the authors that I work with did book swap amongst themselves as like a cross-promotional thing. But she learned that I'd never read Anne of Green Gables and thought that was heresy and got me to read it. And I, too, found myself, like, tearing up when Matthew died. And I'm like...
Oh, yeah. So upsetting. God.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Bridget. Next up, we have Mary Walsh, author of Crying for the Moon. What was the first book that made you cry, Mary?
Heidi and her relationship with her grandfather, that really, when he said goodbye to her, when they took her away, that made me cry.
Yes.
And it's the first book I remember making me cry.
Heidi, that's the one, it got adapted by Shirley Temple, right?
Yes, the movie, yeah.
Yes, so we're talking about the same thing. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, no, that's huge. Okay, thanks, Mary. Next up, we have Laurie Duty. What was the first book that made you cry, Laurie?
Oh, my goodness. I am trying to think back in the day when I was young. I'm not sure, but I feel like it might have been Love You Forever by Robert Munch, and I always cry now when I read that. I think my kids think I'm nuts because I cannot get through that book.
Don't get me started. Crying. I'm tearing up thinking about it. Like, that one's never been an answer for this question, but now I'm like, why isn't it? That's a hard book. I feel like that's so different from all of Munch's other books that I feel like he did this on purpose. Like, I feel like he wrote a book and drew pictures and packaged it as a children's book, but that what it's supposed to do is be a gut punch for the parent reading it. I feel like you're supposed to buy it, not read it in advance, sit down with your kid, and sit there and start to read it, and then at the end, you're a bawling mess, and your kids are like, what's wrong with you?
I know, it's true. And anybody who's, like, I find... anybody I've talked to that's had a kid, myself included, gets like 4 or 5 copies of this when their kid is born because everybody just, I don't know, it's definitely a tearjerker for sure.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. Next up, we have Peter Bro, a contributing author to Mississippi Zombie. What's the first book that made you cry, Peter?
First book that made me cry? Comic book or novel?
Either.
I have to put some thought into that. I'm not exactly sure if I've ever read anything that made me cry. I read some things that made me extremely happy. I'm thinking probably the first one that I read that made me cry would have probably been the death of Gwen Stacy back in when Green Goblin threw Gwen Stacy off of the Brooklyn Bridge, and Spider-Man went to catch her, and as he did, he reveals himself to her because he's been in love with her all these years, and she's been in love with him, but neither one of them knew that she didn't know he was Spider-Man, and but she probably suspected that he was, and it was a big turning point in comics too, because I don't think there was ever a supporting character that was killed before then, eh?
That was the end of the Silver Age, like where it's like you cannot count on heroes to win every time anymore.
Yeah, exactly, but that was the brilliance of Marvel, right? They changed the game, eh?
Yeah. Okay, that'll do. All right, perfect. Thank you, Peter. Up next, we have Aaron Vance, editor of the From the Rock series from Engine Books. What was the first book that made you cry, Aaron?
I don't cry.
Ever?
When
like a Klingon?
I think I cry on average like 3 times a year.
Okay.
And it's usually because I've hurt myself.
I see. So not a book or a movie?
I've only cried at one movie, and it's South Pacific.
Oh, I thought it was going to be Infinity War.
No, that just shook me to my core.
Yes, that was a difficult movie. I was actually talking about that. A very young child I know was talking about Infinity War. He was playing with Legos, and he had a little Thor from Infinity War. And I was like, have you seen that movie? He's like, 7. And I'm like, yeah. And I was like, didn't it upset you? And he's like, no, why would it upset me? And I'm like, it didn't upset you when Spider-Man died? And he was like, he didn't die, he just turned to dust and faded away. And I'm like, kids really are resilient. Like, Like,
Oh,
and now I'm wondering how many children have watched that movie and go like, oh no, he just turned to dust and faded away. But to be fair, that's no more unrealistic than Thor shooting lightning out of his eyes.
It's true.
Why would I think that this has anything to do with reality?
That's a fair point. Like, and also how many children have had the, okay, so they're no longer with us. Like, for all they know, maybe they just got transported to, like, another planet or something.
Which, in fairness, is a part of the comics. Like, when you get killed by the Soul Stone, you actually just live in the Soul Stone.
That's where all the theories on Tumblr are coming from.
That's why young Gamora's in the Soul Stone, and it's all this, like, yellowy at the end, because they're in the Soul Stone. In theory. Or, like, so that if it's following the comics, that's why, but the movies don't always follow the comics, so you can't always...
That's true.
It's not always a 1-to-1 ratio.
No.
So no book has ever made you get sad.
I think you should keep this really awkward long pause in.
Okay, sounds good. All right, sounds good.
I don't read sad stuff.
That's fair. Maybe what about just like so many typos you get sad?
No.
No?
Okay, actually, there's a book that Neil Gaiman wrote. I don't know. Something about the lake on the other... I don't know. It's a recent one. And that made me feel things, but mostly just kind of like I need to go have like a hot cup of tea and like watch Captain America Winter Soldier to make myself feel better.
I see.
So I'm not sad because it wasn't a sad book, but it wasn't a happy book.
Cool.
I wish I remembered what the something on the end of the lane? Shoot, my friend loaned it to me. I don't remember. Anyways, it's really good. It's really pretty if you like Neil Gaiman. I normally don't like him, though.
The most recent book that ever made me cry was one you lent me, actually. Was Blankets, the graphic novel.
Yeah, it made you cry?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, finishing a book in one sitting because I couldn't put it down. The ending just destroyed me.
I was really enjoying it, and then I loaned it to you, and then I think school happened, and then I haven't read anything since.
So school causes illiteracy. We understand.
It does when you're working and doing school at the same time, yes.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah. Well, school never taught me literacy. I knew how to read before I went to school, so yeah.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Okay, that's it for this week's episode of the Right Project podcast. What's the first book that ever made you cry? If you're brave enough to let us know, please check out the Right Project podcast on Facebook and let us know. Or if you're an author and would like to be featured on the show, please check us out and let us know as well. We'll be sure to get in touch with you. Big thank you to Kelly, Helen, Chelsea, John, Amanda, Diana, Ellen, Brad, Bridget, Mary, Laurie, Peter, Paul, Aaron, and Tanith this week for coming in and sharing their emotional trauma of literature. I'm going to be down at Elaine's Books this Saturday, December 15th from 1 to 3, signing copies of my latest book, Touch Your Nose, as well as some of my older titles. Also present will be Shelley Churchill, who is promoting Chillers from the Rock, as well as her upcoming YA novel, The Last Tree. We look forward to seeing you there, down at 208 Duckworth Street at Elaine's Books. In the meantime, happy reading. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.